This week hasn't been as busy as last week, but there's never a dull moment, so let's get right into this week's news highlights. Late Friday, it was announced that Gizlane Maxwell was granted limited immunity for her cooperation with the Department of Justice in an open case that we really don't know anything about, except that it clearly is related to defendants stemming from the Epstein case, which has got to be criminal. Limited immunity is not a pardon or sentence commute. Limited immunity is a legal protection for the evidence or statements that she provides that could incriminate her. It's not a blanket protection, however. She remains vulnerable to prosecution for other crimes if independent evidence is uncovered, and her existing 20-year sentence for her role in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking crimes is unaffected by this immunity. When questioned, President Trump has indicated that he hasn't thought about a pardon or other release, but he's open to it. My guess is that she will at least get the balance of her sentence commuted, but she likely can bring down a whole lot of people, so perhaps a full pardon will be granted. Watch how this is going down. The left narrative is clearly that Maxwell is not a credible witness because she would say anything to get out of jail. This may be true, but the government has a boatload of evidence, and the administration is implying that records have been doctored. So they need Gizlane to validate or dispute evidence that might come up, and you can bet that if they were doctored, the DOJ will be seeking to prosecute the officials involved in the doctoring. The Democrats are getting so desperate and honestly aren't happy that their dirty tactics aren't working anymore. Alina Habba, President Trump's personal attorney, became a target of the deep state during her 6 months as the interim United States Attorney for the District of New Jersey in 2025. She was appointed by POTUS in March 2025 for a 120-day term that expired in July, and federal judges in New Jersey refused to extend her appointment. Instead, these pompous, apparently compromised judges chose once again to interfere with the commander-in-chief by taking it upon themselves to replace Habba with Desiree Lee Grace, a rhino that pushed for sanctuary policies and backed Democratic policies. But their trick didn't work and was nipped in the bud because just hours later, Attorney General Pam Bondi fired Grace, and the Trump administration reinstated Habba as acting United States Attorney, extending her tenure for up to 210 additional days. It is getting wild. Why would the left overstep their bounds so badly? Habba has prioritized election fraud and indicted several prominent New Jersey Democrats. Remember the sumo wrestler, Representative LaMonica McIver, who stormed an ICE detention center with an angry mob for a routine inspection? Well, Habba indicted her for assaulting, impeding, and interfering with law enforcement officers. McIver's trial is set for November 2025. Did they really think that canning Habba would stop it? In the same incident, Habba charged Newark Mayor Ras Baraka, but the charges were dropped. Like most of them, he doesn't have the smarts to just shut up and be thankful. Baraka is suing Habba for false arrest, malicious prosecution, and defamation. Every one of these judges are exposing their own attempts to stop our duly elected president from doing their job, and should all be disbarred and prosecuted for treason. And we are going to need some "You're Fired" t-shirts. The Commandant of the United States Coast Guard, Linda Fagan, has been terminated over her failure to address border security and her excessive focus on DEI. Also, April Falcon Doss, the General Counsel for the National Security Agency, or NSA, was fired from her position today. She was appointed in 2022 by the Biden administration and was senior counsel for the Senate Intelligence Committee's Democratic Staff for the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election, also known as Crossfire Hurricane. I'll link a video. So I think we can bank on these Comey and Brennan prosecutions to bring in a lot of additional defendants that will be charged. So we've got Epstein, which is going to explode, and we have the whole Steele dossier election influence that is going to bring in a lot of people. I would think that when the Comey election interference prosecution goes down, it's going to bring in the election rigging with it, and we will see many low and higher level arrests regarding results rigging also. The pressure is not easing up on the Federal Reserve either. President Trump has been hinting about what a bad job that Jerome Powell has been doing by refusing to lower interest rates. He also made a highly publicized trip to the Federal Reserve to inspect the $2.5 billion palatial renovation of the Fed's Washington, D.C. headquarters. The renovation broke ground in 2022, and nobody even flinched of extravagant additions to two government buildings such as underground parking, which is quite rare and expensive in D.C. due to all the tunnels. There's extensive use of Georgia white marble and lavish amenities like rooftop gardens and atriums, high-end dining rooms, and private VIP elevators which POTUS compared to the Palace of Versailles. There are areas restricted to senior leadership, board members, or select staff. This guy thinks he's running Google instead of doing what's best for the people. President Trump criticized the project's $2.5 billion price tag, which he says has ballooned to $3.1 billion. Deputy Chief of Staff James Blair and Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vought agreed that it was excessive, and Vought suggested that the Fed may have violated the National Capital Planning Act by adding such features without proper approval from the National Capital Planning Commission. Jerome Powell denies that the renovation is irresponsible or extravagant, but has failed to provide any specific figures or itemized expenses, and Trump and his staff are not the only ones done with the Fed. Rand Paul is echoing his dad's mantra to end the Fed, and even private corporations are filing lawsuits. The case of Azoria versus Powell accuses Jerome Powell of violating the Government in the Sunshine Act of 1976. James Fishback is asking for a temporary restraining order, or TRO, to make next week's upcoming Federal Open Market Committee meeting public for the first time ever. This would be a huge hit to the Federal Reserve, who has vehemently fought transparency of any kind since its inception. So the new Iran crown prince was elected, and there are somewhere between 5 and 7 million Iranians living abroad who really want to go back to their country. Also, Mossad and Sunni Kurds are part of the conversation here, and all hopes that this is the regime change we've waited for. After all of the excitement about President Trump signing the big beautiful bill ACE, U.S. District Judge Indira Talwani overstepped her authority and issued a temporary restraining order to block a provision in the bill to defund Planned Parenthood by barring Medicaid reimbursements to healthcare providers who offer abortion services and received over $800,000 in federal funding in 2023. The one provision, which was part of a sweeping tax and spending package passed by Congress, was challenged by Planned Parenthood. They claimed it unconstitutionally targeted the organization, violating its First Amendment rights to free speech and Fifth Amendment equal protection rights. Talwani's initial 14-day order, which was later extended to a preliminary injunction on July 28, prevented the enforcement of the funding ban nationwide. She argued it was designed to punish Planned Parenthood for its advocacy and provision of abortion services and could lead to the closure of nearly 200 of its 600 clinics. They maintain that this would affect over 1 million patients who rely on Medicaid for non-abortion services like cancer screenings and STI testing. I have never once heard of Planned Parenthood doing cancer screenings, and almost every county has a health department for additional services. So, we've heard so much about the New York City police officer who was killed in that tragic shooting of 4 people on Park Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, New York City. The official narrative is that he had chronic traumatic encephalopathy because he didn't get accepted to the NFL in high school or some such nonsense. But the facts are that the guy was actually a private investigator driving a BMW and was found with a note saying he was mad at the NFL. But get this. This seasoned gumshoe took the wrong elevator, notably to the 33rd floor, when the alleged NFL target was on floors 5 through 8. How does that even happen? I checked who was on the 33rd floor, and it is a privately held, family-owned management company that manages the building along with some of the most valuable property in the city, including Times Square. Several migrant shelters were located in and around Times Square, so I wondered if there was a connection there. A lot of truthers are saying that BlackRock has offices in the building where the shooting occurred, but it's not BlackRock. It's Blackstone, which occupies 15 floors in the building, and while the specific floors are not detailed, the firm expanded its footprint to approximately 1 million square feet, in a lease finalized in July 2024 that extends through 2034. However, both Vanguard and BlackRock have significant control over Blackstone. Remember that number 17 told us that there are no coincidences, so these are just a few of the particulars that the mainstream will never mention. This is how we look behind the veiled truths. ICE has announced arrests of over 200 alleged illegal migrant child sex offenders in Houston in just 6 months, including 5 who were previously deported. But it's not only Texas. Florida has had 500 arrests of illegal migrants for child sex offenses in 6 months. California has had at least 50. Minnesota has had 47. These are not arrests of illegals with priors. These are current arrests for these crimes. They will be arrested and then turned over to ICE unless the state obstructs ICE and leaves them out on the streets. So that's this week's update. Everything is going along as planned, so until next time, remember, sometimes when things are falling apart, they may actually be falling into place.